Me again. So it is my pleasure to introduce a really accomplished guest and conference participant and a new friend. Someone that I had the pleasure of presenting with earlier in the conference. She is a scholar of 20th century British literature, former faculty member at Widener University. She is the president of the Modernist Studies Association, but she comes today also as a partner from the Modern Language Association, where she serves as the program director for professional development. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Janine Utel.
Super short. Can everyone hear me okay? Hi, good morning. It's really good to be here. It's been really fantastic to hear remarks and conversations from everybody here over the last couple days. I feel deeply honored to be standing up here right now. In an episode of her podcast, Push Classics, Dr. Anika T. Prather notes that from her earliest years, she has grown with, lived with, loved books, beginning with her home shelves, visiting the library, and coming home with bags of books. She found her passion for classics at Howard University as she pursued her BA in education and theater, thinking, as she says in her podcast, of Antigone as a hero. At Howard, she says, she realized these texts were for her. And as she moved into an extensive career as an educator, artist, and classical humanist, her faith, her love of and expertise in music and drama led her back to classics and the profound significance of classical education for the African American community. Dr. Prather is not only a committed teacher scholar, she's one of our foremost thinkers on education. She argues in a June 2022 interview, we need to be rethinking and dismantling the exclusionary practices and policies in pedagogy and curriculum, practices that have made people feel the classics are not for them and have deprived them of the power and hope made possible by these texts. From Howard, she went into teaching throughout the Maryland and DC region and achieved multiple advanced degrees in music and theater education from Howard and NYU, and a pivotal master's in liberal arts from St. John's College in Annapolis, completed simultaneously with her PhD in English and literacy education from the University of Maryland. She continued teaching, exploring ever more fully with her students what great books mean for African American students, the many ways they see themselves in those stories, their texts, and cultures. Dr. Prather's PhD research and beyond has developed to ask how classics and great books, texts, and traditions matter to Black students, the ways the texts and the students' meaning making of those texts speak to their experience and what it means to be human, as well as the profound significance of the classics to Black minds and Black thought. Dr. Prather reads the classics as essential to students' lived experience, as evinced by her creation of the Living Water School in Northern Virginia, a classically inspired school for independent learners, as well as her teaching at Howard University. And if you're on Twitter, you can see this firsthand in Dr. Prather's celebration of her students' midterm essays. It's really great thread. She guides us to see classical literature and the Black intellectual tradition in rich conversation, each shaping the other in symbiotic relationship around the most pressing questions facing the humanities, including how the field of the humanities has not always kept its promise of belonging for all. This is not simply a question of whether the classics are relevant or relatable. It is a call to recognize the essentialness of these works and their living forms to thinkers on education like W.E.B. Du Bois and Anna Julia Cooper, both of whom have been deeply influential on Dr. Prather's work. These are the foci of Dr. Prather's two books, Living in the Constellation of the Canon, the lived experiences of African American students reading great books literature, which emerges from her PhD dissertation, and her recently published The Black Intellectual Tradition, Reading Freedom in Classical Literature, co-authored with Angel Parham. What I found in reading Dr. Prather's work was the recurring figure of the table, a table at which Black students are made welcome, at which the classical and African intellectual traditions of which they seek to be a part, are theirs. In Living in the Constellation of the Canon, Dr. Prather's research led to the creation of a play, The Table, conjuring the seminar table around which the students did their work together, but also a table at which they are welcome and transformed. In the Black intellectual tradition, Black teachers, students, intellectuals, and leaders are brought together to, as Dr. Prather writes, quote, share in the feast of the canon, unquote, a canon which is theirs to think together with Black writers for whom great books were and are world-shaping, a shared wealth. We are indeed fortunate to have Dr. Anika T. Prather here today to share with us, and let's please express that good fortune with openness now. I'm very honored to welcome her.
She made me want to cry because I'm very much, whether you know it or not, I'm very much a free spirit. My husband laughs at me because he's an engineer. Anyone's married to an engineer, you know what I'm talking about. It's very different and very structured. And could be 1 minute crocheting and the next minute fiercely typing at my computer a tweet. 1 minute just kind of reading a book, fiercely writing a tweet. It's just and I never know who's listening until I go back and see responses. Sometimes I don't see the responses right away because I write it and go off and do something else. But then to hear this and how people are listening and they're piecing together my thoughts and my passion for using this study of the liberal arts, humanities, or classics, or classical education, those terms seem to be very much interchangeable, but I see them as one, as a tool to bring us together. They are our shared heritage. And that is my heart. And I want to have these conversations while at the same time being honest about how they have often been used to drive us apart. But they can bring us together. So I love the poster for this conference because there's a phrase I say, and there's a talk I give. I sometimes give lectures or talks to high school students who go to private schools or classical schools, because a lot of times young people in K-12 education are ashamed that this is the kind of education they have. They don't feel cool. And one reason they don't feel cool is because once you have been enlightened by this type of learning, you can't go back. And everything else seems a little bit mundane. And so they're in these classical schools, usually within a year, their brains start to evolve and change. And then they try to go back to the friends they used to hang with, and the conversations, they're saying to themselves, I can't believe I used to enjoy talking about this, or I can't believe this is how I used to see the world. And then they're afraid to tell their friends, have you ever thought about seeing the world in this way? Because they don't want to be seen as being uncool. Honestly, in my dissertation, there's a whole section about it. They actually felt that it was cool to look dumb. And I'm not, and I hope you don't think I'm not an elitist. So I want you to understand where I'm coming from. That was just a young person's way of articulating how it felt. I in no way feel that those who don't have a classical education or don't study humanities or liberal arts are not smart or as smart as me. That's not my thinking, so I want to make sure I'm upfront about that. But young people recognize that something happens in their mind that anyone can have access to that does set them apart from their peers. And the word they could only find to describe it was, I have to look dumb to be cool. And so I try to help them understand this. Well, let's not use the word dumb, but let's try to find a word of, why don't you share if you share your enlightenment with your friends, then you all can grow together. And so that's what I try to talk to high schoolers about. And the way I give them the courage, I'm going somewhere with this explanation, I give them the courage by giving a test. And I'll say to them, and you can take this test too, because I think we all might be in the same similar situations with our peers. And I'll say, if you, amongst your friends, if you're like one of the only ones in your friends group that has this type of education, but you are the one your friends go to for advice, raise your hands. Literally, everyone goes like this. Is it okay? If you are the one that can engage in conversation with people old enough to be your grandparents, more than your peers can, raise your hands. And then finally, I'll say something like, if you are out in the world and you recognize that you see something deeper than the young and the old around you, and it makes you feel a little strange, raise your hands. And I'll say, well, if you raised your hands on all of those, you have a superpower. And it doesn't mean you think you're better than others. And then I'm going to take you on a journey looking at the struggle of Marvel heroes and DC heroes to embrace their superpower. The storyline is very similar, whether you're in DC or Marvel. I'm a Marvel fan myself. I just have to put that out there. Although I do have my Superwoman watch on. I love this watch because it reminds me that I can do this. But so the storyline is the same. A person, usually a young teen or a young adult, gets bit by something, you know, hits their head on something, gets struck by some chemical, something happens in their life, or they somehow fall off their planet and end up on Earth. I don't know. But something catastrophic happens to their life, and they find themselves amongst human beings with this superpower. And at first, they want to hide it because they feel like a freak. And they also don't know how to use it. My favorite story is, I think it's Captain Marvel. That's the woman, right? The girl. So Captain Marvel, when she realizes she has this superpower, she doesn't quite know what to do with it. She wants to hide it. She's depressed that she has it, until one day, over time, she learns how to use it to her benefit and to the benefit of humanity. And then the other part of the storyline is that there's usually an arch enemy that has a superpower too. But on the good side, you know how to use your power for your benefit and for the benefit of humanity. The bad guys use it only for their benefit. And that's what sets them apart from each other. And so what I'm sharing with you, what I would share with anyone, young and old, is that when we gain access to the study of the humanities, and when I say humanities, let me just say this, I want to keep saying this every time. I'm going to use the word humanities for the sake of this conference, but I also mean liberal arts, I also mean classical education, I mean the Western canon, all of that. And I also mean those things that should be in the Western canon, but that's another topic. So I mean that. So I'm going to say the word humanities for this, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. I have to find those terms. And any one of us who has been exposed to that, you immediately gain access to superpower, and you begin to harness that in yourself. I was in my 30s when I discovered fully the meaning of studying classically or studying humanities. When I went to St. John's, my parents started a classical school, and I was teaching the great books class that at first I thought was not for my people. But I wanted to support my parents. And so I immediately started reading these texts so I can teach this class, and I was going to use music and drama to help the students engage. And I fell in love immediately. The light came on. Immediately, my life changed. It wasn't because a teacher said, well, this is how you understand Aristotle, or this is how you understand Plato. The moment I began to read, my life changed. And I was in my 30s. And as I recognized that, I said, what would happen if a young person changed? They would have much longer in this amazing experience and not have the hindrances of a mind that is aging really fast. What would happen? So if I can get it with my strong-willed self, who just thought no one should read classics or humanities because they need to be reading Maya Angelou, little did I know Maya Angelou read it. If I can come to realize that, then what would happen to children, teenagers also came to realize it. And how can I show people that this is our superpower left to us by the ancients? So I'm going to show you 3 superpowers you gain through studying humanities. Truth, healing, I added healing, and justice. And we need those three so bad, especially the healing. And the reason why I included healing is because I will say humanities healed me. And I needed deliverance from hurts I endured from racist experiences in predominantly white schools. I needed to forgive. I needed to see the world differently. And I didn't, even though I loved the literature of my people, the literature of my ancestors, that I read all the time, I was immersed in it. My healing came through studying humanities. And I want to look at why, and why this healing is a superpower. But let me start off with truth. The truth that can be found in studying humanities is our shared humanity. We were talking here at the table earlier today, and we're baffled that we're still in 2022 struggling to figure out how to remove the racial divide. Why are we still here? And what I've discovered in this journey I'm on is that the truth that my ancestors and other people's ancestors discovered in reading the old texts, the words of there's a book called Breaking Bread with the Dead. I haven't read it yet, but I already know I'm gonna love it. It's just like on this stack of books that I have to finish reading, but it's gonna happen. But Breaking Bread with the Dead, when we read the literature of those who have lived and have gone on to the next life, when we read their wisdom, how they endured their human experience, we gain truth. We learn how to navigate similar experiences here. And so there is a poem that is foundational to everything that I do that I want to share with you. And it's written by Maya Angelou, who, as a little girl, her healing came through the library. A young girl abused and mistreated, who did not speak until she was 10, found healing in reading various works of the canon. But this is, and you gotta know that's what her basis is, to write a poem like this. It's called A Human Family. We are family. Don't you hear? We are family. Sorry, our human family. I note the obvious differences in the human family. Some of us are serious. Some thrive on comedy. That's me and my husband. Anyway. Some declare their lives are lived as true profundity, and others claim they really live the real reality. The variety of our skin tones can confuse, bemuse, delight. Brown and pink and beige and purple, tan and blue and whites. I've sailed upon the 7 seas and stopped in every land. I've seen the wonders of the world, yet not one common man. I know 10,000 women called Jane and Mary Jane, but I've not seen any two really were the same. Mirror twins are different, although their features jive, and lovers think quite different thoughts while lying side by side. We love and lose in China. We weep on England's moors and laugh and moan in Guinea and thrive on Spanish shores. We seek success in Finland, are born and die in Maine. In minor ways we differ, in major we're the same. I note the obvious differences between each sort and type, but we are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. And I felt that when I read the canon. I found people who may not have looked like me going through things that I was going through and giving me wisdom and truth to know how to handle these things. Another part of truth, you can see it displayed in the Negro spirituals. Now, I consider all ancient religious texts part of the canon. the Quran, the Bible, the Torah, Analects, any text connected to a belief system is valuable to me. So when I share this is not favoring one. I'm going to be talking a little bit about truth as found in the Quran, as found in the Bible. I'll start with the Bible and then how that's demonstrated with a people group and how this truth helped them. So you have Black people taken from their homeland in Africa, brought into America, and birthed out of that was this entire canon of music based on the Bible. Because it's all they had. It's the only text the masters allowed them to know, but wouldn't allow them to read sometimes. And so when they would read verses like in the Psalms, when your mother and father forsake you, God will take you in. Even though their parents didn't forsake them, they identified with, I have no parents anymore. I am a slave. My master is probably my father, but would sell me in a minute. They were dealing with this sense of motherlessness and birthed out of that understanding of a book that told them a truth about who they are, that they could hold on to, came songs such as, sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. A long way from home, from home. A long way from home. But yet when they read that verse, they could say, I may not have a mother or a father, but God sees my pain and He is with me. We also learn truth such as Rome didn't just defeat everybody and that's the end of the story. Because the Quran teaches us that they lost, that they fell for a little while. And they fell at the hands of people from the Middle East, and they fell at the hands of people from Africa. And so we don't have to get into this space where we only honor Rome as the most powerful force to ever have lived, because there were times that Rome failed. And so we read the ancient texts that intersect with some of these works of the canon to gain truth. And this is not to say Rome wasn't amazing. This is not to say Alexander the Great wasn't amazing, because they were. I'm not going to deny that. I look at Alexander the Great and I'm like, whoa, like, you were amazing. I can't even let my issues with racism deny that. Help make me deny that. Like, it just is what it is. And so, but the truth is that when I go through Humanities, so I love the term Humanities, because it really does allow you to broaden outside of the West, and it allows you to welcome in the text that fill in some of the holes that are left when we only read the West. But we can learn about what the Quran says about some of those other times Rome didn't win. Then we also learn the truth about the best way to be educated, which to me is probably the most important part of this talk. Because it is in our schools where our citizens are born. And if they get a certain type of education that teaches they are better than others, and that other lives and other experiences are not relevant, then that's the citizen you produce. That's the citizen that votes. That's the citizen that becomes a political leader. But if our schools, which is why I'm so passionate about my new position at Johns Hopkins, because it allows me to speak openly and freely about this, if our schools incorporated more humanities, content-rich curricula, then maybe we can produce new types of citizens. that whether you're Democrat or Republican or Libertarian or Independent, at the end of the day, you honor human life. And so the kind of education that Quintilian talks about is the same kind of education that produced people like Cicero, which has influenced some of our greatest politicians and abolitionists and leaders. And Quintilian says, this is true, that children from infancy should be taught how to speak and write well as a way to serve humanity. That you know how to stand up, state your case, so that everyone in the room, no matter what their different beliefs are, see your point, especially if that point does make the world a better place. And he has a whole book called Institutio, I'm not a Latinist, guys, so bear with me, Oratorio. Talks about from infancy, you're teaching children that. And I practice that in my home. And some of y'all who follow me on Twitter have seen my oldest son as a demonstration. That thing works. It works. It makes kids not fight. It makes kids be able to just articulate, because as Martin Luther King says, a riot is the cry of the unheard. So it teaches children, Black, white, no matter what, to be able to carefully articulate what the issue is in a way that we can understand and make change. And so Quintilian really actually inspired the education of America. Many of us don't realize it, because there's a book that came from that thinking of Quintilian. It was inspired by Quintilian, called The Columbian Orator. And The Columbian Orator was the premier text of early American schools from the beginning of America all the way up to abolition or emancipation. And this is the kind of education that Anna Julia Cooper had, Du Bois had, Frederick Douglass gave to himself, that taught, I gotta read these speeches of people who passed on and who stood up in different Roman synods and gave these great speeches that changed their community. We have to read those same speeches so we can learn to do the same in this life. And that was the type of education. And a really good example of a student of that at the time was Terence the African. Terence the African, I believe, came from Ethiopia as an enslaved man in Rome, ancient Rome. And his master educated him under the same philosophy as Quintilian. And he became fluent in Latin, and he began to write these beautiful plays. You can find these plays on Amazon, the plays of Terence. I love them. The Girl from Andros is my favorite. But this is the thing about Terence, and this is true, is that his plays were written in such perfect Latin, more than anyone from that time, that his plays were used in ancient schools all the way up to American schools. So most of our founding fathers, John Adams tells his son, I believe, I hope I'm not having to mix up, John Adams tells his son, John Quincy Adams, that to learn Latin best, read the plays of Terence. You can look it up. Everything I'm saying, I have data, so you have to look it up on the internet. But for sake of time. And so Terence makes his way into American schools, and his plays are a product of him having the education of Quintilian. And he goes into the American schools that are still inspired by Quintilian, because they have this book called The Columbian Orator, it was written inspired by Quintilian. And that same book is the same book that Harriet Beecher Stowe read. The woman who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, which they say was instrumental in even starting the Civil War. Do you see this pattern of truth? We have this information. This is truth. This is our superpower. So you, as a parent, as an adult in this society, when you see the ills of our society, the issues of education, just like Storm has the secret power to control the weather, and everyone in the community media says, what do we do about our schools? You can say, I know, I got the truth. This is the answer. This is my superpower. Or you can give it to your children. Even if their schools don't have it, you can take elements of it and pass this superpower on. So that's true. We get, that's our superpower. We get healing from reading from the humanities. We gain healing. It helps us deal with our pain when we read about the pain of those who've gone before and how they made it a lot out. It has helped me in my darkest moments to read something. In the time of trying to make a decision, I know when I was trying to make a decision of leaving Howard, I was reading Little Flowers of St. Francis of Assisi. And it tells a story of Friar Bernard, who was his like assistant, who went to another land to start a monastery. He became really popular in the town. He was very successful. Everybody loved Father Bernard, and he began to realize it was time for him to leave, and he didn't want to go. And it was at that time that I was like, should I leave Howard? Should I go to John Hopkins? What should I do? And I'm reading this, and for whatever reason, that book spoke to me, and I wrote my letter. I was able to resign, and I knew I had made the right decision. That sometimes the thing you love the most, you have to let go of, so that something beautiful can come forth. And so we have other examples. We have Phyllis Wheatley, taken from Senegal. So traumatized as a 7-year-old girl, taken from her mom and dad, sails across the ocean in the Middle Passage by herself in this ship with strangers who are enslaving her, with rival tribes around her. And it is believed that it was so traumatic for her that the only memory she had of her childhood was of her mother getting up to pray to the gods. But she found healing in classics. She learned about her. She was able to have a hand on her African continent because she learned about Kush. She learned about Ethiopia. She learned about Egypt, and it made her feel a little close to home. She read the Bible, which reminded her of some of the traditions. A lot of the slave narratives, if you read them, they will say, Ola Uda Equiano says this, the traditions that he practiced in his tribe reminded him of some Christian traditions. And so these texts provided a sense of familiarity, which was healing for them. And you know how good it feels to run in contact with someone who is having a similar experience. It's very healing. So Phyllis Wheatley found healing. Gandhi found healing. Paulo Freire found healing and the answers for the pain of his community. And then the third superpower we have is justice. Now, before I go to justice, let me go back to healing one more time. What makes this so important is that when no one else can give you answers, when there is no hope anywhere else, your mindset can't get right, you can pick up a book. And who's gone through this? You can just be lost. And some book, just you pick it up, you read it, and it speaks to you and sheds light on the darkness. If you ever experienced that, raise your hand. Yeah. We don't have to wonder around how to get out of the space. We can find a text to heal our souls. And then finally, it gives us justice and what it should look like. You know, in this fight about should we read classics? Should we have a humanities department? Should we read the canon? You know, it's racist and all that stuff. And I'm not saying that's not true, because it is true. People have misused this body of knowledge. We're going to be honest about that. But what touches me is that those who misused it are actually a minority in comparison to the many people who used it to bring about justice. If you look at every single activist in history, I call it read back, like what was foundational, you're gonna find Socrates. You're gonna find Aristotle. You're gonna find Shakespeare. You're gonna find Cicero. You're gonna find these texts that we love. You can't cancel them. You cancel them, you cancel humanity. They are our foundation. And people like Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King, found answers to how to deal with injustice in these texts. Frederick Douglass said, I was 12 years old, he had taught himself to read. I was 12 years old and I had come to a place of utter despair. I looked for these kind of lines like that, like I was in darkness or I was in despair. And then I found this book. Like that's, I look for those. It's kind of like a, and I'm just tracking it all the time. Because I was in utter despair and I thought I would forever be a slave. And he found the speeches of Cicero from the Columbian orator. And he began to, at 12 years old, he began to read these speeches over and over. And then he also found a dialogue that we're not sure if it's Platonic or what, but it's called A Dialogue Between a Master and His Slave. And in that dialogue, the slave convinces the master to set him free. And that dialogue was it's in his autobiography. He says, when I read that dialogue, I decided that was what I was going to do. I was going to do that to convince white people to set their slaves free. I would say he was successful. He used words. He used logic. And he learned this logic without a teacher. He learned this way of thinking and being an activist and an abolitionist with the threat of losing his life. If you were caught with a pencil or a book in your hand would be cut off. But he still learned logic. He learned it so well that he died as an ambassador. He lived his life speaking all over the United States and the world against slavery to the point where the President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, although they had a really weird frenemyship, I'm not quite sure what to call it, but they had a connection to the point where Abraham Lincoln, even though sometimes he may have disagreed or he wrestled with some of the things Douglass would say or wanted, he made him a consultant during the Civil War because of how Douglass could articulate so well the need. Or we have Martin Luther King. Now this story is powerful. I'm going to end here because I really want you to grasp the superpower here. This is the most beautiful example of how powerful these texts are. He had been arrested. Martin Luther King had been arrested and put in jail. He had no paper. A lot of times when we read letters from a Birmingham jail, we imagine him sitting in his library, even though it says he was a letter from a Birmingham jail. We imagine him sitting in a library surrounded with books with no notepad out. He's writing, he's looking through his books. And he had no writing pencil, no paper. He only had his mind. Now, Martin Luther King used to teach a course on philosophy at Morehouse. And you can find the list of books he had his students read. It included things like Aristotle, Plato, and so on and so forth. But in this letter, Thomas Aquinas, but in this letter from Birmingham jail, the amount of references to the works of the canon are almost innumerable. And he writes this masterful letter. And a lot of people may not understand why he wrote the letter. It wasn't a random act that he just said, oh, I'm bored, let me write a letter. While he was in jail, a group of white ministers wrote an op-ed telling the world Martin Luther King was wrong for his protests, that he's not obeying God, he's not respecting authority, he needs to learn to wait it out and let things run its course and respect authority and so on and so forth and all this other, foolishness. And Martin Luther King knows about this letter while he's in jail. And he writes a counter argument. And that is what Letter from a Birmingham Jail is. And he used the works of the canon to support his argument. And so there was one part of the letter from the minister that said you need to stop. And this is what Martin Luther King said to them as he sat in that jail, not knowing if he would be lynched in jail or set free. He says, we must be non-violent gadflies in order to bring change. As Socrates brought change to his society, risking his life to do so, I will be, and I will continue to be, a non-violent gadfly. And because of him, I'm here. There was a time we wouldn't be in this space together. But because of the many activists and people who fought for justice, we are here. So don't forget your superpower. In this work, in this body of knowledge, you will find truth. There's so many answers of what it means to be human. You will find healing in your darkest days, and you will find wisdom on how to continue the fight for the justice of all people. Thank you.
I'm sure there aren't any questions. First. Anyone have a question for Dr. Prather?
Not afraid to go first. You mentioned the analects of Confucius in your introduction, but then everything else you talked about was Western. And I've spent some time the last few years working on correlations and helping students read both Chinese and Western texts. So I'd like to hear how you might think we should go about incorporating texts from that incredible tradition.
Yes. So I have just started reading the Analects, and one of my desires before I die is I want to go back to St. John's to go through that program on Eastern Studies because of that. And the most I can say, because I'm not an expert at this time, and I want to be careful not to just talk on something I'm not a full expert in, is I think we need to be reading the Eastern canon. Because, and you'll find this actually, and I didn't say this because I was running out of time, just like with the Eastern canon, there's also, like you have something called the Anika symbols, which is, I call it a writing that is found in Western Africa. What we see common in all of humanity and all these different people groups is that all people groups gather wisdom, written wisdom. Sometimes it's oral, but usually the oral ends up being written. And it tells the story of a people. But when you read each of them, you see so many similarities in the way human beings think and experience the world. And so I guess I would say to your point is, even though I love classics and read the canon, my point with mentioning that is this, is that because we're all equally human, we all have wisdom to share. The only thing that sets the Western canon apart is because people have taken time to gather around it, to gather it, and promote it as such. As a people, all of us, we need to do that with other canons, other groups. There's a short, you can find it, if you look it up online, it's called The Human Story, and it's an essay I wrote with some online publications that I cannot remember. But it talks about the importance of reading all of these different human stories. Because like and I hope I'm answering your question, it's a broader answer I'm giving to your question. Yes, we should read the Eastern canon, and it is very valuable. And I often wonder, and I don't know, maybe you can speak to it, I often wonder if there's an intersection with the Eastern canon and the Western canon. Like I have found an intersection with the Western canon and Africa, a very strong connection, and that's where my specialty is. But my guess, when I read different stories and you kind of get a sense of the world was such a different place back then, where people were leaving their continents and going to different places and intersecting often, it makes me wonder if I were to know that, the Eastern canon, would I see the same intersection that I see with Africa as well? Yes.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
How you doing,
I want
Dr.?
your t-shirt. I need your t-shirt.
How you doing, Dr. Prather? I have a comment and then a question.
Yes.
I just, again, want to
want to thank you. That was beyond powerful. I was over here recording it. It was just amazing. And being from Birmingham, it really touched my soul. I just wanted to give you affirmation for the classic. So when you talk about Cicero, that was just wonderful. But I was thinking about August Wilson when he gave the response to the ground that I stand in. And he talked about how Shakespeare, Tennessee Williams, Malcolm X, that's the ground and the tradition. So I just love that. And Doc, I think that I just want to give you props. It's befitting that you are a Marvel fan because you are Professor X. And I just love, just want to give you another round of applause. And working with our young people, and here's my question about our young people, especially as someone that works at a community college where the humanities are kind of being minimized. What is a strategy that you think we can do to engage our young people in the humanities? Because, you know, a lot of the two-year colleges is to kind of work for us and just get into the economy and you need to work in those. I just want to know what type of strategies we can do to center the humanities.
That's a great question. I think one of the strongest things that made my class at Howard so strong, and the Howard students want to continue this even when I leave, is inviting, even if it's not for credit, setting up, because that'll foster a love for it, where you are discussing classics together and they're relating it to their human experience. That is really key because right now, most people don't feel it connects. If they're a person of color, they don't feel it connects. And if the person just in this time, they don't think it connects. And so I'm gonna give you a good example, and my students love it. Have you ever heard a student say, I really enjoyed this midterm? Like, I've never heard that, but I get that a lot. I'm not saying that arrogantly, and the reason why is my midterm is called a reflection paper, where they have to pick a text that they feel connects to their human experience. And it just provides a way, and they have to reference the text, so that means they have to read the text. And so on the one hand, it's hard. I get a lot of, it's just hard. Have you read it? Well, not yet. We're not gonna pass the test if you don't. You don't have to fill in the blank. I'm not asking you to memorize dates. Just sit yourself down someplace and read the book. You know how to read. You wouldn't be in college if you didn't know how to read. So when they read it and discuss it and write about it and then relate it to their human experience, they need opportunities where it's not just academic. Just memorize this and say you know these terms or know this book. Don't just write notes for what I think the text is about and all the history behind the book. Just a simple reading and discussing the text where no one feels like I have to be smart or I feel insecure about not understanding some of the terms in these books. And I actually use this. I have students that come to me after hours, and because I do these little tutoring sessions, their college level reading is getting better. Because I've given them tools for reading Aristotle. What do you do? Well, first of all, you can't read it while you listen to music and hanging out with friends. You got to find a quiet space. Because I hated Aristotle. I hated him with a passion until I understood him. Once I understood him and what he was doing, anybody ever heard me say he's my boyfriend? Like, I love him. So I always say that when I have a text that I love, if it's a male, I'll say I love him. Now I love James Baldwin, but he was gay, so I can't love him, but he's my best friend. I think if community colleges, schools, whether it's after hours at certain times of the day, you just invite students to come sit and discuss with you. Like you pick a book a month or a text. It could even be short. One final thing is, because sometimes the book itself may seem really scary, excerpts. Pick a key excerpt to just get their feet wet, that they can read overnight really quickly and come back and let's talk about it. And then before long, they're sending you messages. Dr. Prather, you got any more books I can read? What else should I be reading right now? And so I feel like that would help. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hi, thank you very much for your speech. I really just had a couple of comments that I wanted to share with you. And in some ways referencing the gentleman's questions. I think the fact that I think the fact that we're all here probably speaks to the power of the classics. I imagine that a great number of us really, earned our love of academia, of scholarship, of teaching because of our early introduction to, or whether it was, voluntary or forced upon us, that we were brought into the power and the truth
Yes.
of the classics, right? And I love the fact that you've expanded that and that we should be speaking of it as the truth that is shared amongst all humans and therefore expanding the canon. But I have to say that your speech actually touched me mostly on a more personal level. I have a 12-year-old son, and he spent his entire life going to DC public schools, and they've done a perfectly fine job of, teaching him the basics. I won't put anything down on them. But I don't feel, as much as I talk to him about what I do, and as much as I know that he takes pride in the fact that, as he tells, his friends, my dad's a professor, that he really has ever embraced learning and love, a love of learning.
Yes.
And I think that that's really a tragedy, given the way that so many of our schools are now focused and what they're focused on. But
Yes.
to that point, he just finally got into, we took him out of a DC public middle school and got him into Latin's new campus. And
Washington Latin?
He's at Latin, at the new Cooper campus.
Yes.
And I'm really praying that this is going to create that change.
Yes, it
that
is.
you're talking about. And the first book they made him read is a graphic novel form of the Odyssey. And
Yes.
it's the first time we have ever sat and actually talked about the books that he's, really engaged each other in a discussion of this book. So on that personal level, I'm seeing, hopefully,
Yes.
the potential of the classics to really change some of
Yes.
these educational perspectives.
I was gonna say when you finished, I said, I was gonna say, you need to send them to Washington Latin.
It's not easy to get them in.
It's
so.
not, and I spoke there for the opening of the campus, that one, not that long ago. And, Diana, does some volunteer work at my school. She teaches advanced Latin at my school. We just kind of exchange. It's a wonderful school. I don't believe you will be disappointed.
I don't think I will either.
Yes.
Thanks so much
You're
for your
welcome.
speech.
So I have perhaps a sort of connecting question for my colleague Peter, but as you were speaking, you were making all these wonderful connections between classical texts and contemporary texts. So wondering in terms of teaching, kind of building that enthusiasm, how do you recommend making these kinds of connections? Like a graphic novel in this case, or pairing texts together? Is
Yes.
it Antigone and Persepolis?
Yes.
What's
Yes.
the approach?
I'll tell you, the first tool that helped me when I started this was in the Anthology of African American Literature, the Norton Anthology for African American Literature. And it's put together by Henry Louis Gates. And he is wonderful because he has a love for the canon too. So he goes through these texts and he footnotes wherever a text from the canon is referenced. And so it allowed me to be able to create kind of another kind of list that showed these parallels. So for my students, especially the ones in my dissertation, I did pair. My reading list would go back and forth almost in a dance or a conversation between two people. So for example, we did Raisin in the Sun, but there is a reference to Prometheus Bound in the Raisin in the Sun. It's one line, but it's a key line where Benita's boyfriend yells at Walter and calls him Prometheus and leaves. And so we read Prometheus Bound because we wanted to see why would he keep calling him Prometheus. And it's really a reference to Walter's stubbornness to do what's right for his family. And that's kind of the connection that they made. And so you can just kind of understand, it's really understanding why people of color or all people reference the canon in their writings. I have often wondered why. I wanted to find the exact words, why. There are theories. People will say a person of color, a person coming into America who reads classics might be trying to assimilate. might be trying to forget their heritage, might be trying to become elitist, which that does happen, that's true. But in the ones that I've been sharing with you, there's something else there. And I think the best person to explain that for me was Chinua Achebe. And he wrote his memoir called There Was a Country. And he's written a lot of books. My goal is by the end of this year, I'm gonna read everything he's ever written. But I'm working through There Was a Country. I finished Things Fall Apart, and I'm working on, and then I'll go into Arrow of God. But in his memoir, he explains why he read classics. And then his father read classics, and his mother read classics, and he read classics and then chose to write all of his stories in English, even though his tribe, the Igbo people, were angry at him for not writing their story in their native tongue. And this is the thing that you help them understand, is that, and he says, I wrote it in a universal language because I want everyone to know our story. So that being said, when you take things like the Norton Anthology of African American Lit, that's one that has a nice, if you follow the footnotes, you can create a reading list and pair it together. And then what you do is you discuss, well, why would he call him Prometheus? What is it that he's trying to translate for us? And then they can have this conversation about the two stories and why those two stories intersect. The only thing is that it's going to make your reading process slower, but I feel like it'll be richer.
If you had to pick one text to give somebody to start, your favorite boyfriend, what would you choose?
It used to be Du Bois, but now it's Chinua Achebe because of how open he is about his love for the canon. But he does it in a very gracious way that invites everyone to want to read it. So I'll say right now it's Chinua Achebe, reading anything he's written and understanding his philosophy and why he's writing it the way he is. And then Du Bois is Souls of Black Folk, because it's really a great treatise on why classical learning is the best way to educate Black people, and I think it's still true today. It's the best way to educate all people, we say that. And then finally, Parts of Animals by Aristotle. And I know those aren't easy, but Chinua Achebe might be easier to understand, but Parts of Animals is good. It's a good way to help kids understand Aristotle. Because all of his other books, like when I read Parts of Animals, I was finally able to understand everything else he wrote. It just shows really dramatically his thought process. Everything for Aristotle was about questioning, like the question is like a shovel digging you deeper and deeper to understanding. And then you create these kind of chains. What if the wing was for this, and the this is for this, and he kept doing that over and over in Parts of Animals. And then he ends with, and that lets me know this is the essential being of. And so when I analyzed that, I was able to go back to other things and go, oh, that's what he's doing. If I can follow that pattern, what he's using logic, and he's also using the senses, and he's based on what he's seeing, he's building a case for understanding the world he's in, whether it be the theater, whether it be politics, whether it be animals. And so that helped me understand Aristotle, because if you don't understand Aristotle, you will miss out on such a blessing. So.
Hi, Dr. Prather. Thank you. My name is Melissa. So I have a interesting and helpful, provocative question for you. I teach African American history, and I just finished listening to on audiobook Michael Beatty, Beatty or Beatty, The Sellout. And I was speaking with one of my colleagues, and she teaches African American literature, and if you're not familiar with the book, it is satire and it's brilliant. And I think, are you familiar with the text?
I'm not.
Oh, okay, then. Um,
Say the name again, though, was like,
the sellout,
what's that?
yeah, the sellout, Michael Beatty.
Okay.
Beatty, he's an African-American writer, but, you would have to be familiar with the text.
Okay.
And you would need to know that it is pure satire. I asked her, I knew my colleague Gail, she did teach it a couple of years ago, and he won the Pulitzer for it. I think it was around 2013. And I asked Gail, I said, Gail, you taught this to your students. How could you have taught it to your students? Because you have to be so familiar with African-American culture, and American culture and history. And it's brilliant. I mean, Latin references left and right here and there. And I just really want to hear your take on it, and if you'd ever use it. And it's a great piece of literature. I could really see why it won.
Yeah.
But it would be quite something to teach. Yes, you are upper division, I would think. I'd love to talk with anyone after.
I
Have
absolutely.
you ever taught it? And so much reference in terms of, you'd have to have a lot of knowledge. So that's why I was just curious.
Okay.
Thank you.
Dr. Prather, thank you so much for enlightening. Thank you so much. My name is Tony from Tucson, Arizona, and if I just relate a story, it's very consistent with what you were talking about. When I was 10, my father had a very extensive library, and I snuck into it one day, and I just happened to pull out Plato. And I opened it up at 10, and first line in the Republic was, "What is justice?" So remarkable for myself is that I understood it. I understood the question, and maybe I can understand there as well. It took about 10 minutes, and I realized I didn't. The first sentence, but and I carried that book around with me all the time, no matter where I was, and had the Republic with me all the time. Hopefully, my father didn't know it was missing. One day, I was sitting on the park bench, and a young lady came over to me. A young lady, when she was 17 or 18, probably like an older sister one day. I was like 10 or 11, and behind her was her boyfriend. And I'm from New Jersey, so the first response was, he started walking over, I'm gonna get beat up, for whatever reason. So it didn't happen. But she asked me a question. She said, "What are you reading?" And I said, "Well, I'm reading Plato." And she had no idea who it was. And she wanted to know more and more and more. And two things happened to me. First one was, I wasn't getting beat up. Number two was I was going to be a teacher. Because when I saw the enlightened face of a person who probably had no idea who Plato was,
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
as me knowing very little, then I realized I had to go to his student, Aristotle. And his first statement in metaphysics was,
Yes.
it is the desire for every
Yes.
human to know.
Yes.
And those two things, my universe started with question and never ended, but it also moved on into a statement. And I
Yes.
realized it was so heavily connected.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your comment.
Yes. Thank you for that. Yes.
Any other questions? I think we have enough inspiration to last us for a year. We are now, another round of applause.